No plan survives its collision with reality. Susan Scott. We're going to take a look at Susan's quote, connect it with a few ideas, and see what we can learn. There's this idea of the map is not the territory. So when you have a map that you've drawn based off of what you've seen in the past, the thing is the world's always changing. And so if you treat the map as the source of truth when the underlying territory that it's trying to represent has changed, you're no longer dealing with reality. And so when we tie this with Susan's idea of the plan not surviving its collision with reality, is this sense that when you are just stuck to the plan and the underlying reality, the map that you're trying to, let's say, go from point A to point B on, if before there wasn't an obstacle in the middle, but now, the map is wrong and there's a giant truck that's stuck in the middle of the road and you can't go from here to here, well, you have to update your model of the world. We strive for permanence. We burn with desire to find a firm footing, an ultimate lasting base on which to build a tower rising up to infinity. But our whole foundation cracks and the earth opens up into the depth of the abyss. Blaise Pascal. Pascal here is referring to this almost psychological urge to want to build something that lasts, to rise up and to conquer our sense of death, to establish a sense of permanence. There's this ideal that the human species has to want to acquire status, to acquire a sense of immortality in a way. And when we are trying to stick to this sense of permanence, inevitably the entire foundation will fall apart because nothing can last forever. Everything is impermanent. Everything shall perish in its own time. And so when we are just so stuck on sticking with our plans without adjusting to reality, then we're at a higher risk of the foundation falling apart earlier than we expect. Change is constant. People are usually afraid of change because they fear the unknown, but the single greatest constant of history is that everything changes. Yuval Noah Harari. Yuval here is alluding to perhaps this confirmation bias or this identity clinging where we are afraid of letting go of what we think we know. That any plan or any map that we've created in the past, we get this false sense of confidence and we're afraid of changing our mental models of the world because we're afraid of the unknown. Like we don't know what's going to replace that. And yet the only thing that we do know is that change is the only guarantee, that everything will change. And when we're unwilling to update our plans when they start colliding with reality, well, disaster is bound to occur. Embrace feedback. A system that ignores feedback will eventually be shaken to pieces by repeated violent contact with the environment it is trying to ignore. John Galt. So when we tie this idea with Susan's quote of no plan surviving its contact with reality, is this sense that if you ignore reality, like you can do it, at some point the collision between your perception of the world and wanting to cling to that, whether it's your plan, you're trying to start a business and you've been trying to do the same thing over and over again and it's not working. At some point you're going to run out of money. And that is the collision with reality, that if you don't update your plans, then you're going to be shaken to pieces. And there's this idea that the earlier that we can update our plans to collect feedback from our environment, from the people around us, that when we are allowing that feedback to soak in, to interpret it, and then adjust course, update our plans, that's when we will have less risk of being violently clashed against with reality, as opposed to almost like surfing a wave where you're making minor adjustments based off of the feedback that you're getting in your environment so that doesn't just completely crash over you. Disrupt yourself or others will. You have to disrupt yourself or others will do it for you. Steve Forbes. So this idea of a plan clashing against reality is not just for a physical plan, like you have a business plan, or you have an actual map that you're trying to get from point A to point B. I would also argue that this idea applies to your own identity, your self-image, how you perceive yourself. And when you are so focused on sticking to who you think you are, how you've always done it in the past, without regard to how the environment's changing, how the people around you is changing, how the world is changing. So let's say right now, I think one of the biggest risks facing our society is how AI is likely to eat a lot of jobs in the next decade or two. And a lot of people aren't really prepared for that. And this idea that you have in your mind that you deserve a job, that you clearly have value to offer to the world, yes, that might be a plan and a self-image that has worked in the past. But if you're not staying ahead of the curve, if you're not keeping a pulse on what reality looks like, especially projecting it out 5-10 years into the future, that's where you either disrupt yourself or others are going to do it for you. And if your self-image is so stuck on being who you are today without adjusting to some of the changes in reality, well, then it's very possible that a decade from now, you might become like the coal miners of today or the truck drivers of 5 to 10 years from now when automated vehicles take over all the truck driver jobs. Ideally, you're the one that gets ahead of it. You're updating your plan as reality is giving you new information, as opposed to letting reality be the one that crushes your plan and crushes you in the process.